Welcome back to America's Commercial Real Estate Show. I'm Michael Bull. This segment is brought to you by Bull Realty, Asset and Occupancy Solutions. Visit bullrealty.com. Today we're talking about emerging trends in real estate 2018, an incredible report. It's put out by PwC and ULI. We have a link to the actual program, what do you call it, the study, right here on our website at cresshow.com. We have Mitch Roschelle and Andy Warren here in Studio One with us from PwC. And the next segment is Procession of the Generations. All right, tell us about that.
So let me frame it with some technological references, okay? So if you look at the baby boom generation, what are some of the advents in technology that happened during their generation? The photocopier, the fax machine, the beeper, and Pong.
Beeper.
But if you think about all of those, I think the biggest disruptor of office using jobs was the fax machine and the photocopier. I mean, if you watched the TV show Mad Men, you just saw this big sort of cavernous area lined with what used to be called secretaries that were typing away to make duplicate copies of something. You entered the photocopier and they totally disrupted that workforce. If you go to Gen X, the PC really sort of came of age during their life. Cell phone, email, and Mario Brothers, of course, that was their big thing. For the millennials, you had the tablet, the smartphone, social media, and Super Mario 3D. And lastly, for Gen Z, you got wearables, the chat bot, and we're going to go with the Super Mario virtual reality game that's going to be out there. But the fact of the matter is, technology has been the thing that sort of defined all of those generations. And as they're in the workforce and they make workplace decisions, where to work, how to work, housing decisions, all of those are changing with the generations. So that's what this chapter is all about.
Yeah, I mean, we have to skate where the puck's going, right?
Right.
That's kind of what this report's all about, is looking at that. Now, the next one is, don't forget the baby boomers. I thought we didn't care about them anymore.
Well, the interesting thing about
Unless we're in senior housing.
Yeah. We're going to get to that. Aren't we all three of us are baby boomers, aren't we?
Exactly.
Yeah, easy, I'm right here.
And we all thought we'd be retired by now, which isn't happening. As we're finding out, is that that a very large cohort, getting older. A couple things that kind of jump out talking to people. They're working longer, and part of that is the Great Recession kind of changed some financial plans, but also they're healthier and they're skilled and they're thinking, why retire? Or they can't sell their McMansion in the suburbs because there isn't a buyer pool for that yet. So that group we're seeing is going to be around longer. Well, if they're not just all suddenly going to pick up and go to Florida, then are there other options for them? We hear a lot about, they're going to sell the house in the suburbs, move to the city, urban living, and some of that is happening. But we're kind of missing a step. What if you don't want to live in the city, but you do want to downsize? Seems to be a real shortage of kind of that, maybe age-restricted but active lifestyle housing in the market. And think with people working longer, that need is probably going to continue to increase. And you're now going to be balancing a workforce that is 65 to 70 million people entering, and the boomers are getting smaller every year, unfortunately, but that group is still fairly significant sitting on this other side. So who may now get squeezed will be Gen X, and the millennials again are going to kind of be caught between these two groups.
And here's what's interesting, and I mentioned the third leg of the stool in terms of how we do emerging trends is data. So let's sort of jump back to data for a second. The Bureau of Labor Statistics defines the American workforce as workers 16 to 64. There's two flaws in that age band. One is my 17-year-olds are still not in the workforce, but more importantly, at 64, people aren't leaving the workforce, right? So if you look at the workforce participation rate, which has precipitously fallen over the last generation, okay? The workforce participation rate is rising amongst people 65 to 74. If you go back to 1994, it was just over 17% was the workforce participation rate for that 10-year cohort. If you go to projected out to 2024, it's just under 30%.
Wow.
So the fact of the matter is older workers, for whatever reason, living longer, need the source of income, rising costs of healthcare and other things in retirement, rising cost of housing potentially in retirement is causing them to stay in the workforce longer, and which is something we actually need. But when you look at the workforce participation rate that gets released on Jobs Friday once a month, they're really ignoring, because it's not in the stats, the fact that the workforce participation rate for older workers is rising, all of which I think is good for real estate, because if you look at the other side of it, the 16 to 64, with it shrinking because of technology, maybe because of loss of some jobs overseas, the fact of the matter is that is taking away the demand for commercial real estate, taking away the demand for retail real estate, office real estate, and maybe to some degree industrial real estate. So this is actually a little silver lining here that people are working longer in that baby boomer generation.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. It's the America's Commercial Real Estate Show here, and you talk about the aging workforce. Commercial real estate seems to have a big issue with that, right?
Exactly.
I mean, you look at the average age of some of the commercial real estate people, whether they're in asset management, property management, they work with funds, REITs, brokers, everyone. It seems like we need to get some younger people involved.
Yeah, it's very much in that kind of real estate's in that lower to mid 50s range for average age, which is pretty old when you think about it.
Yeah, so all you young people, let's go. Let's get in
Come
commercial
work,
real estate.
go work
Come
for
on.
Michael Ball in Atlanta.
Come on,
people.
come on. All
All right.
right.
By the way, so I speak nationally, not just with emerging trends, and I'll walk off the stage and literally somebody will come up to me and say, hey, you're the guy from the Commercial Real Estate Show.
Yeah.
So you have a pretty big reach. Somebody once said to me, what's Michael Bull really like?
You didn't tell him, did you?
I certainly didn't.
All right, so the next one on the list from Emerging Trends in Real Estate 2018 is, it's different this time, isn't it? So,
It is different.
and you're meaning the cycle mainly, right?
Yeah, well, meaning the cycle and meaning the markets that people are looking at. And this time, we've hit the peak, and and as people look at the report, they'll kind of see that, and we'll talk about markets a little bit later. But some of the gateway markets that people sought safety in 5, 6, 7 years ago, when the market was beginning to recover, pretty pricey. And as one interviewee kind of put it, supply-constrained markets kind of have the disadvantage of sometimes being demand-constrained as well. So people are beginning to seriously look at some of these secondary markets, and not every secondary market, obviously. They're looking at the top markets. They're looking at the Dallas-Fort Worths, the Atlantas, the Seattles, kind of those big markets that have shown. But, let's be honest, those markets have been boom-bust, which we talked about. Is that still a problem? But, more people are looking at them. Foreign capital's looking at them with more intent than ever before. And part of that's the extent of the cycle being longer. They have more time to kind of explore these markets and get comfortable with them. And people don't like to invest in markets unless they're comfortable with it. So the key will be, think that these markets will continue to be attractive if they don't mess themselves up. It'll all be if you don't overbuild and continue that kind of moderate trend. We'll see more interest in these, so in 2-3 years we could be talking about the top 10 to 15 markets instead of the big 6, which people have always been talking about.
And what's really interesting is, and Andy touched on it, and Michael, you know this from your business, which is there are markets that are very attractive to foreign investors, and then there are markets that are less attractive to foreign investors. Not that there's anything unattractive about them, but often foreign investors have gone historically to the gateway markets. And they became very cap rate compressed, very high on a price per square foot basis. So investors, and to the point you made earlier, who participates in the survey, investors and participants started looking, where are people not looking? The perfect case study I give you for that is Austin, Texas, which Austin broke into the top 10 in emerging trends maybe a decade ago. And no one really understood why. We can actually tell you why, but no one understood why, and no one really took it seriously. Texas is a pro-business state. There's very low barriers to entry. And market participants saw the population growing there and said, hey, maybe this is a place to invest. The point is, and we'll get to it in a later segment, there are a lot of other markets that have those attributes that Austin, Texas has. And what Emerging Trends has been able to demonstrate over time is that people seek out those markets, find them, and then stay there.
And when we talk about it's different this time, talk to our audience that maybe has been in commercial real estate for 10 years. is this cycle a little different? When we do have some sort of downturn, is it going to be different?
Yeah,
And why?
I'm going to answer it one way. I'm sure Andy's going to answer it another way, which is if you look at the new additions to supply of commercial real estate in this cycle, we're still adding to new supply at a rate that's considerably lower than it historically had been coming out of recessions. We're now later in the cycle, so we're now adding to supply at a slightly greater rate than the long-term average. But if you start looking at that in terms of its component parts of retail, industrial, and office, you realize we're still historically adding to supply. We're adding to supply at a rate that's still in line with historical trends, if not a little bit behind some historical trends.
Yeah. And I think it's different this time, and we talked about the transparency in the market and people being more educated, more data available than we've ever had before. And that includes the capital sources. So maybe we don't have that point where all of a sudden lenders get into a bind and whoop, they yank the chain out from everyone. So maybe that eases kind of that downturn and consequently probably benefits some of these rising secondary markets. So that's where we tongue-in-cheek, it's different this time, because usually that's our major red flag. When you see that it's different this time, we automatically put a note next to the interview and say, crazy.
When anybody uses the absolute that it will never happen, I'd go out and do the opposite. Right?
Yeah.
So it looks like it just a little smoother transition. So
yeah, well, it's certainly slower growth and coming out of recessions in the past, and a little more subdued. You feel a little more comfortable, and I like what you said earlier. The window of opportunity has been a little longer. People can make decisions. You don't have to rush in and do what you need to do. So, we're going to take a short break and get back. We're going to talk about 3 more trends from emerging trends. Stay with us. I'm Michael Bull. This is America's Commercial Real Estate Show.